Welcome, Steve Tyndall, to Legal Practice Intelligence Channel. I mean, great to have you here.
Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, we've known each other quite a while.
We have. It's a very small world, and you're a very well-connected man. So we've.
Same goes with you, Steve. I mean, what's actually been really interesting is when we've had conversations is around your knowledge of mid-market and how you're actually quite knowledgeable what they're doing. Practices around business development, around I guess around client retention, around client acquisition, around and also employee acquisition and employee retention. So I mean, we've had some really sort of interesting discussions, probably over a few ales, but which is all good. So Steve, I guess one of the things that you've been kind enough to talk to us about today is the Great Resignation. Before we do that though, do you want to introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. So Steve Tyndall, I'm the CEO and founder of ClientSense. My background is really as the head of IT for mid-market firms, mid-tier firms in Australia. And so my experience has been in heading up IT and then after that consulting into firms around different systems, technology stacks, and then more recently with ClientSense, which was actually developed off the back of the consulting that we were doing and some of the challenges we were finding. So I have a lot to do with a lot of law firms, but also accounting firms. So I'm very lucky to have that experience and have the opportunity to speak to a lot of different firms.
Yeah, no, interesting. I mean, I guess you're in a great place to see what firms are doing well and what they're not doing so well, and who's thriving and who's sort of just surviving. You may have seen this term pop up everywhere across the internet, the Great Resignation. Yeah, what are your thoughts on this?
In one hand, I guess I appreciate that there is this term, Great Resignation. There seems to be a lot of talk about it. I'm not particularly sure it's going to hit legal and accounting in exactly the same way that it will in other industries. But nonetheless, I think there will be a lot of impact, not just maybe for firms themselves, but maybe it's for the staff that are moving at their client organisations, if nothing else. So even though we might say we've got partners locked in and, a lot of different retention strategies that law firms or accounting firms even have themselves, that won't stop necessarily the people you work with and at the companies they work at necessarily moving on. So I tend to maybe not go with the whole hype that's around it, but I even look at it and say, well, even if it's just 20% or 10% true, and that's what we can expect, then we do, it is something that firms are going to need to manage and to think about.
I mean, there is a war on talent out there. I mean, you're seeing US firms and UK firms like dive into the Australian pool of talent, and borders opening up as well. I mean, how many people will leave Australia? And I guess, when I think about resignation, is it a case of you resign from your job, or you're looking to move countries, looking to move into a different industry? Could be a variety of things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think there's a few things that probably play into this in a number of different ways. We've got, are there juniors coming through? I mean, there arguably might have always been a shortage there that's now, I guess, exacerbated by COVID and other things. When I've spoken with a lot of senior leaders at law firms and accounting firms, and even at a chairperson level, I've had across accounting firm networks, the chair of these organisations talking about the talent problem that they've got. Seeing it as the number one issue that they're facing. How will they get people? How will they grow people? And even working remotely. I mean, there's a lot of advantages, I guess, to working remotely, but maybe one of the disadvantages is not learning by osmosis, not getting the opportunity to be involved in matters and client engagements as juniors might have in the past. So I think there are some challenges that are coming through the pipeline, and I suspect that for firms this will be priority one for the next 12-18 months at least as we deal with this shortage, because I think firms have had an uptick in work. There's no doubt that there's probably more work than there was this time 12 or 18 months ago, which sounds ironic, but it's true for many firms. So I think there really is a shortage issue and something that firms are going to have to address.
I mean, what are the good firms doing?
Personally, I see it's retention, not so much acquisition of new shiny lateral hires, but actually the retention of existing staff. And what I mean by that is really giving them some purpose. Like personally, I think there's been a lot of, I'll say, brand damage done internally for a lot of firms that maybe have, taken measures early on during COVID, which may not have helped the employee, relationship as such. So as far as I can see, I think there'll be employees that are more loyal, if anything, now, post-COVID. There may be some that are less, but I think for those that have done it well, they've actually got a higher level of loyalty. I mean, I know a particular firm in Sydney that talks about the fact that during COVID, they were positioned well to be able to work without interruption. People were able to do their job really well. And that actually meant that, where other firms were losing people and people were getting scared, they were being approached by, people at other firms saying, can we come and work with you? So I actually think this challenge, if you like, causes a bit of or creates a bit of an opportunity for those firms that can do it well, and equally a problem for those that are not.
Are you seeing that mid-market firms are picking up hires from the top firms?
I think there is an element of that that's going on. And I also think there's the firms that are willing to invest in people. So maybe not bringing someone in at the most senior level, but bringing someone in and growing that person, building them up, giving them opportunity, giving them, purpose. That's where I think we're seeing a lot of firms do that really well. And similarly with their client engagements, I would expect that there's been a lot of firms which have really, I think they've cemented relationships more so than ever during COVID. So they've really been that trusted advisor, which is what law firms should have always been, trying to become or be. But I think that's really happened for a lot of firms. And therefore we've got, juniors that have probably, I'll say, stepped up in terms of their client focus and their focus on the client rather than the problem. I think COVID's brought that in, and that's probably meant that, as I said, I think there's juniors that will be rising through the ranks, if you like, a little bit quicker and with a little bit more purpose.
I mean, you can actually easily assess the qualitative part of relationships that clients have got with the firm and with the employers themselves. But I guess the quantitative data, you got 5 juniors working with clients. How do you actually assess which one's the best?
Yeah, it's a funny thing, isn't it? Because once upon a time we would have, it's easy to say the one that bills the most, right? That's the obvious pick. I'm not sure that's always true nowadays, particularly when, relationships they're critical. They're going to be important, and they're going to be what brings the revenue in. So I find that, when people talk about soft skills, I don't like the term soft skills. I think they're skills. They're great skills, and actually they're the skills that will bring the revenue in and protect that revenue. So, I always like to think those as the real skills, maybe more so than, running the matter. And in my thinking there, you've got a lot of these firms that now got the ability to, we've got a firm here in Brisbane. What they've done is they've allocated client relationships and referrer relationships out to the team. So dispersed that and said, I want you, associate, to take on this relationship, to grow this relationship. And what I'm seeing that do is that helps me decide which of my juniors, is the right or are the right ones that are going to rise through the ranks. And the juniors have really responded quite well to that, because they've been given clarity around what it is that's expected of them. And particularly at a time when I think COVID's made things a little bit tougher when it comes to understanding, what people expect in the work environment. And for those associates, I'd say they've had an opportunity in many cases to step up, prove themselves, and prove that what they can do, with a level of autonomy or people can rely on them to do those things. So yeah, I'm really seeing that, maybe less, hopefully now we're relying on those matter-related billing, aspects, and a little bit more around client management and really just, managing a relationship and diffusing a situation. I mean, they're skills that most people should aspire for. And if I had my way, they'd be the lawyers that we've got facing the clients.
So if you could tell or if you could actually give some advice to the people and culture managers in mid-market firms, I guess, getting new hires on board and doing their resource planning, what would the top 3 pieces of advice be?
Look, I think it's really about giving the opportunity, giving the challenge, but the opportunity. So it's not, it's a little double-edged, but allowing people to grow where otherwise it might have been that the associate was just, shadowing the partner and following into meetings. I think that the advice I would give is actually, take a bit of a gamble or sort of put a bit of ownership back onto your associates, your juniors, and give them the opportunity to shine. Because I think if anything, what I've seen is they value that equally. And particularly if people are going to be working from home, you need to feel purpose behind what you're doing, not just do it, because we can all log on to a computer and work for 8 hours a day or whatever's needed. But having purpose in what you do and a sense of fulfillment, I think actually comes from having those challenges, responding to those challenges, and being given, the autonomy to do things and do them in a way that allows you to prove yourself.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of resource planning side of things, people traditionally would have looked at, the areas of law they're in, what kind of resource they deliver. So I guess what you're sort of saying turns things on its head a bit and saying, take it from a client perspective and say to yourself, what kind of clients are we dealing with? What kind of resources do we need to work with the clients we're actually kind of dealing with versus looking at matter-based type resource planning. Is that right?
Yeah, and you need to get the work to do the work, right? So we can be excellent at doing work, but actually that's not going to build next year's revenue. It's going to do the work once we've got it. So I tend to think, if we could, we'd be much more focused in on the client, and particularly now, if there's going to be less face-to-face, for the foreseeable, it's probably much more important that lawyers and firms are going to have these client-facing, skills rather than the ability to do the work, maybe more than ever before. Because, whether I'm pushing work to a firm down the road, they're probably doing it. Someone's doing it in study at home, or is it going over to India? Well, it doesn't make much difference to me as the client, but ultimately, what I need is that level of accountability and that person that I can interact with. So I tend to think there will be more importance on that client-facing and interaction side of managing a client.
So I guess from a point of view of, you've spent, you're a law firm, you've spent the money in nurturing the juniors, you've actually got some fantastic sort of, paralegal secretaries, etc., that are actually working the firm that you really like, and these people become amazing assets. I mean, how do you put a ring around them and protect them? How do you make sure they're not being poached and put that protection around them, put the fence around them?
Yeah, look, I tend to simplify these things a little bit. I think of it like everybody will have a different scenario in some way. Everybody that works for the firm is a person. That person will have specific needs. And I tend to think if you can manage those people well, and what I mean by that is, if I've got a lawyer in my team that says to me, I really would like to get home early on a Tuesday night because that means I can pick the kids up and that makes my life a lot easier. Yep. I tend to think that's highly valued over necessarily a lot of other financial aspects. So yeah, people will need to be paid accordingly, but I think it's those things. And what I think that comes down to is if I said, hey, Dave, any chance, on a Tuesday morning, I can get in a little bit late, you'll get more from me through the week, but I just need to get in a little bit later to make my life easier. Yeah. You doing that, it's really difficult for me as a lawyer to walk into another interview and say, look, happy with the salary, happy with everything else you've mentioned, but I've got to tell you on a Tuesday morning, this is what I like to do. I just don't think that's the reality. I think that you'll stick with the one that has given you the, say, flexibility, because otherwise it's a gamble. So I really think that loyalty can be not easily earned, but it's more valued, if that makes sense at the moment. I think that level of loyalty, flexibility, and I know everyone talks about flexibility, but I think flexibility is not a policy that we apply across the whole firm. I think flexibility is that one-to-one and absolute understanding of each of your team and giving them the flexibility that matters to them, not saying, hey, everyone, we finish at 3 a.m. on a Friday. That's 3 p.m. on a Friday. That's not what I call flexibility. Flexibility is flexing for each individual as required and managing each case separately.
So does technology have a place in terms of, I guess, from point of view of actually the client side of things, from the I guess, the employee side of things in terms of actually, how things generally work. So is there a technology play here to figure out, well, actually, these people are the best at actually working with these kinds of clients. These are the sort of resources we need. These employees are unofficially superstars, but they don't get recognised for it. So is there a play for technology in that sort of space?
Yeah, look, I think yeah, I do. I think there's an element of it, not to say that it should shadow the employee themselves or any of that. I mean, it's all human first, and it should be. But really, I think firms that have not just given these what would you say, the relationships to manage, but they're also using systems to then say, are we doing that? So is there proof to say that I'm doing what I said I would? And I know that sounds a little bit authoritarian, but at the same time, remembering that we'll bill in 6-minute units, it's not unreasonable to be saying, well, if you're to look after, let's say, this referrer, I would expect that you would be meeting this often, or you would stay in touch this regularly. So, there's a lot of measures and ways that firms can do that now, but it's not to replace what's happening or any of that. It's really just to ensure and support that, the strategy we think or the tactics we've got at hand are actually being executed. So I really think, it's still very much a human thing, and technology shouldn't get in the way, but where it can help us to support those things and know that we're doing them, I think that's its place.
So what I'm gleaning from a conversation we're having so far is that there's a real place for, I guess, almost like a client success type function or for a client management function, which is client focused versus matter focused, that's been run in a firm, and that's a proper old function.
Absolutely. And I think firms in the past, and I've seen firsthand experience of this, where without any systemization, and I don't mean technology, I mean some process in doing this. So if we just do it haphazardly, what that typically means is that the partner or the most senior person in the group is responsible for the most senior or valued clients, key clients. But actually that doesn't scale very well. And we do that to a certain level, but in the end, it doesn't allow our juniors, coming back to those associates and lawyers, doesn't allow them to grow. So in my mind, firms need to get a lot better at saying, have I got some client relationships that we could grow? Could I give those to my associates? Could they grow those and prove to me that they can grow those relationships? And if they can, what would that mean to us? So the more that can be done, the more the load can be spread. And instead of having this very steep pyramid of, our most senior partners look after our most senior clients and there's nothing else in between, I think what it does is it allows everyone to grow, clients to grow, the relationship to grow, and our staff naturally come along for the ride, and everyone seems to, everything seems to work, and revenue is being built indirectly. We're naturally building revenue as we go.
Yeah. So interesting. Just jumping back into talking about mid-market, because that's where you're a real specialist in that sort of area. And that's, how would you classify mid-market in Australia, for example?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm quickly learning that mid-market in Australia is very different to mid-market in the US. So we've got a lot of the firms we work with here, depending on what you call mid-market, but each will have a different definition. I tend to think the firms that are not 1,000 plus staff, those that realistically are of a size that might be a few hundred staff. They've got multiple offices and so forth, but not necessarily the globals of the world. And really, that what I'm learning quite quickly is what a US firm calls themselves. They will refer to themselves as a small to mid-market firm, and they're quite large by comparison. So that's obviously one of the learnings that we're coming up against now. But I mean, ultimately, I think that mid space, really what it means is there's often a level of, what would you say, there's less bureaucracy, there's a lot of benefit that I think those firms have over the much larger firms. When you've got people managing people who manage people who manage people, it's very hard to be efficient, and it's very hard to get stuff done. What we notice is, for a lot of the firms we work with, we tend not to think of them in terms of the size of their firm, but their ethos. Do we think of everything as it needs 12 committee meetings for us to do anything, or do we collectively think something's a good idea and give it a shot? So, I think what we've noticed is that size isn't always the only indicator of what I would consider to be one of those, those mid-market or more nimble, agile firms. But certainly that's one of the key things we look for in working with a firm is, are they actually going to get stuff done? Or are they going to have, as I said, 12 board meetings before they decide what the next step is?
It's a very thriving sector of the marketplace, and I think where there's lots of opportunities for I guess, carve-outs of bigger firms into sort of that mid-market sort of area, people growing and scaling their firms coming and aggregating themselves together like mergers and those sort of areas. I mean, what do you think the opportunities for mid-market are around the world?
Yeah, look, I think in the end, I tend to think if you consider yourself mid-market, but you've actually got a focus. So your firm is good at what, or you're good at servicing who, I think really, if you don't, I think that they're as equally important as, any of these other factors. So the firms that we love working with the most, we see do the best in terms of just, achieve the things that they're looking to achieve, are very clear on what they do, who they help, and they're clear on what they don't do. And that to me is, it's a really big indicator and a really big opportunity, because, there'll always be global clients that say, I need to go to the global firm because I've got, 13 offices, or offices in 13 countries, and I'll need lawyers in each region, whatnot. But, I think where there's opportunity is there's a lot of national clients, there's a lot of, localized clients that all could benefit from the same level of experience, but don't necessarily want to be using the large firms that are a little bit faceless and maybe a little bit less, as I said, personalized in terms of, are you a priority for them? And I think that's probably another conversation in itself. But as a client, right-sizing yourself to the right size of firm and making sure that you're an ideal client for them, I think is equally important.
And I understand you've been working very hard recently about getting some guides and reports together for mid-market on this sort of, I guess, the employee retention and client retention side of things.
Yeah, that's right. So what we've been doing is, again, we have the opportunity to work with a number of different firms, which is, I feel really lucky to be able to do that. And what it does is it gives us insight into different firms, different challenges, and how each one of them might be solving things differently. So yes, we're putting together now something which we can share that will give firms a view as to how they can address, external staff changes, maybe internal staff changes, what they can do around growing and sort of nurturing those those internal staff members that they're keen to hang on to. So there's a lot of that. But look, even, just to give you a very practical example, we had a firm that told us, and we're always learning, we've had firms that have said to us, they're using our system to help them understand if there are other lawyers at other firms at an associate level that they know that they might be able to approach. Now, that's nothing we'd ever considered before, but it made logical sense. They were saying, now we can appreciate there's an associate at a firm that might be maybe working on the other side of a matter, and they see who knows them. They ask, what do you think of Sally? What do you think of John? And they've got a bit of insight. And they're the sorts of things that, we don't necessarily pretend to know off the bat, but they're exactly the sort of things that, having that cross, working with a number of different firms gives us that benefit. And that's something we're, looking to share back, is some of the really practical things, system, non-system related, that can really help. And I think that's part of what we're trying to do is share the information that we're lucky enough to receive.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I mean, we'll certainly let our subscribers know about where to get that report from, and I guess be like an early Christmas present.
Absolutely. Sounds great.
Brilliant. Well, Steve, there's always an absolute pleasure to chat. Thank you for your time today. Lots of interesting things around mid-market, and I actually hope to talk to you again about, I guess, what's going on mid-market-wise around the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, more than happy to. And yeah, always a pleasure to chat, Dave. More than happy to catch up and work through it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Steve.
All right. Thanks, mate.